Okay, welcome to our digestive system lesson. So this is going to be chapter 3.3 in your textbook. We're looking at the digestive system, the organs that are made up of it, and what their functions are. And you will see as a theme for chapter 3 that there is a lot more memorization, but I don't think that it's something that you can get away from in biology memorizing. However, if you understand the different roles of each of the organs and what they're used for and how they all fit together, it'll be easier for you to memorize. So maybe try and explore a few different techniques for you to memorize things, maybe like cue cards or any of those online tools that are there for you. If you need a few additional tips, reach out to me and I can help you out as well. But let's look at the digestive system. This is probably the most commonly known organ system of the ones that we're going to be looking at, so I bet you know some of this already. If not, it's a good opportunity for you to learn it. Okay, we are going to be looking at the digestive system, but there is a really great Magic School Bus episode. It's called For Lunch, I believe. If you can find it online, I think it's available on YouTube or on a few other sites. If you want to go watch that, it's a really great recap of what we're going to be looking at for the next little bit. I think it's really creative and really fun, but it does still cover and talk about all of the main points of the digestive system. Okay, so the digestive system is a system that takes in, breaks up, and digests foods, and then excretes waste. So everything from the food going into your body, as well as the food coming out of your body, all of that is part of the digestive system. Okay, it is made up of the mouth, the esophagus, so that's what's connecting your mouth to the stomach, the intestines, both large intestines and the small intestine, the liver, pancreas, gall bladder. So all of these components make up the digestive system. So in the first process, when we consume the food and it goes into our bodies, the first thing that we do is break it down. There are a few different ways that our body is able to break down food, or as we can call it, there's a few types of digestion. The first digestion, or the first type of digestion, is what we call mechanical digestion or physical digestion. Both of those are still referring to the same thing. It's talking about how physically there are some parts of our body that break down the food. So it's usually things like chewing, tearing, grinding, mashing, mixing, most of which happens inside of your mouth. So when you are chewing your food, your teeth are tearing it, your tongue is helping in mixing and mashing the food all together. So looking at our second type of digestion is chemical digestion. So other than physically breaking apart that food or breaking down that food, we have chemicals that are released throughout the digestive system that breaks down those foods chemically. So this chemical digestion breaks down the food into its components. So it breaks apart your food into the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the lipids. Right, so these are the different components or the essential components that make up our food, and this is what gets broken down when we do chemical digestion. Okay, on your note, you will find a diagram of the digestive system, and this is where memorizing will come in. Like I said earlier, if you understand what each of these organs are doing, it'll be a lot easier for you to memorize this. So starting off, we have our mouth, and then our esophagus. So you probably already know about the mouth. What's connecting your mouth and your stomach is the esophagus. So this long green tube, it's not actually green, but that tube is what allows for the food to go from your mouth into your stomach. Then you have the liver, which is purple. Red, oh wait, no, we're not going there. Red is the stomach. Green is the gallbladder, yellow is the pancreas, the brown is the large intestine, the pink is the small intestine, then we have our rectum and anus. Okay, so all of these parts together make up our digestive system. I'm going to go over some of the main organs and what their role is, and then we can see or look at how food travels down our digestive system. So starting at the mouth. So as I mentioned earlier, as part of physical or mechanical digestion, our teeth break down our food into small pieces. Our tongue, which is again in our mouth, mixes the food with the saliva, which contains an enzyme called amylase, which breaks down the food even further. So in your mouth, there's not only physical digestion, but there's also chemical digestion with the presence of amylase. Then we have our epiglottis, which is a flap-like structure at the back of our throat that closes over the trachea, preventing food from entering it. And when we talk about the respiratory system, maybe tomorrow or the day after, you will see that the trachea is what allows for air to go in, and you don't want food going into our trachea. So the epiglottis stops food from going into our trachea, and that epiglottis is located in the pharynx. That again is part of the respiratory system, which we will talk about. So we've just covered the mouth, and in the mouth we physically and chemically break down food. And then that food goes into the esophagus. So our esophagus, like we saw in our diagram, is that long tube. It's approximately 20 centimeters long. The functions of it include secreting mucus. So all along that esophagus, you have mucus being excreted. And what that allows it to do is that food can move down the esophagus in a very smooth manner. And it moves food in this process called peristalsis. So we have muscle all around the esophagus, and it moves, and this motion allows for the food to travel from our mouth into the stomach. This motion is called peristalsis. That is something that you're going to need to know. And that food eventually goes from our esophagus into our stomach. And in our stomach, we have acid and different other chemicals that break down the food. But if any of that acid comes up into our esophagus, that's what we call heartburn. Okay, so that is our esophagus. Now moving on, our food goes into the stomach. In the diagram, that is our red right there. It's a J-shaped muscular bag that stores the food you eat, breaks it down into tiny pieces. The food, that when it gets into the stomach, it mixes with digestive juices. And digestive juices are essentially enzymes that are there to break down proteins and lipids. So we talked about how in chemical digestion, we break down carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. In our stomach, a lot of those proteins and lipids are broken down because we have enzymes in place. Additionally, we have acid in our stomachs as well, specifically hydrochloric acid, and it kills any bacteria that we might have in our stomach, and any food that's in our stomach is called chyme. So that's just something that when we're referring to food inside of the stomach, we refer to it as chyme. After we get into the stomach, we move on to the small intestine. And that is the very, very long pink structure that you see there. So if you were to grab or look at small intestines and unravel it and line it up, it's approximately 7 meters long, right? So it's not very large, but it's coiled up quite intensely, but it is, the length of it is about 7 meters long. The lining of intestine walls have finger-like projections called villi. So instead of it just being, so on the inside of these small intestine, instead of it just being a straight up line, what they have in place is what we see here, a bunch of finger-like projections. So they stick out, and there's so many of them. So what this allows to do is allows for more absorption of nutrients from that food, right? Because this increases the surface area by a lot. So if you were to just compare it to these finger-like projections, compared to something that's completely flat, there's only so much of that surface that's coming into contact with the food. But if you have this structure like the villi and the microvilli, which we'll talk about soon, it allows for that surface area to be increased, which means that it allows for the small intestine to absorb more nutrients. The villi further have microvilli. So within the villi itself, they've got these finger-like projections there, again, for the purpose of increasing surface area and to increase absorption at the end of the day. So nutrients from the food passes through the bloodstream through the small intestine. So that's why we have the villi in place. It's so any of those nutrients then can get absorbed through the villi and the microvilli, and then it gets passed along to the bloodstream, which then takes it to different parts of our body. The small intestine absorbs 80% of the ingested water. It absorbs vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. So this is why it's very important that we break down our food through mechanical and chemical digestion before it gets to the small intestine, because then the small intestine can absorb the carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. The small intestine also secretes digestive enzymes as well, again, for the process of chemically breaking down any of the food that hasn't been broken down already. Moving on from the small intestine to the large intestine. So this is the larger structure that we see as part of the digestive system. It's about 1.5 meters long. It's not quite as long as the small intestine, but still 1.5 meters is a very, very long length. It accepts what the small intestine does not absorb. So anything that did not get absorbed in the small intestine is going to be absorbed in our large intestine. Okay, at the very, very end, we have the rectum that is part of our large intestine, technically. And the purpose of the rectum is to hold any of the feces before it's expelled. The functions of the large intestine, as I mentioned, is to break down anything that hasn't been broken down in the small intestine and to absorb it. Bacterial digestion is something that takes place in the small intestine. It allows for further digestion of anything that has not been absorbed already. It absorbs more of the water and it concentrates the waste together. Okay, moving on from the obvious organs that we talked about, so mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, we are going to be looking at 3 specific organs that the food doesn't get into, right? But it does play an important role in the digestive system. So it's not a part of the path of the food, but it still plays a very critical role. So these 3 accessory organs are the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. These 3 don't actually come into contact with the food, but they provide, or they secrete chemicals, or they store chemicals that allow for digestion to take place within the digestive system. So let's take a look at the liver first of all. So that is that big purple structure that we see right next to the stomach. It directly affects digestion by producing bile. And bile is the chemical that helps digest fat. It filters out toxins and wastes, including drugs and alcohol and poisons. So the liver acts as 1 for the production of bile, and 2 as a filter to filter out any waste that we might put into our bodies. Next, we have the gallbladder, and the gallbladder is right underneath the liver there. And our liver produces the bile, but the gallbladder stores that bile and then releases it into the small intestine whenever it's needed. For people who have very fatty diets or diets that are rich in fat, they can cause gallstones, and those gallstones are present in the gallbladder. And our last accessory organ is the pancreas. So the pancreas produces digestive enzymes to digest fats, carbohydrates, proteins. So any other enzyme other than bile that is needed throughout the body, the pancreas produces it. It regulates blood sugar by producing insulin, right? So it allows for our body to process the amount of sugar using insulin, and all of that is produced in the pancreas. Okay, so now we're going to take a look to see if you can remember the different parts of the digestive system, right? Like I said, memorizing is a huge part of it. So what I want you to do is pause the video, and I want you to identify each of those colors there. So the light green, the dark green, purple, red, pink, yellow, brown, you should be able to identify all of those different organs. Okay, and let's take it up. So green, or the light green, we have our esophagus. Red is our stomach. Pink, small intestine. Brown is our large intestine. Purple is liver. The other green, or the dark green, is gallbladder. And those are our main components of our digestive system. So hopefully you got any of that. If you didn't, that's okay. Just go back and review all of those one more time, as well as the function of each of those things as well. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And for homework today, so the first part of it, again, just memorizing and understanding the parts of the digestive system, reading pages 80 to 82 in our textbook, and then answering questions 1, 2, and 3 on page 82. Okay, that's about it.